that was available through Vice, and both of us have become haunted by this woman named Agafia who lives up in the taiga in Siberia. Her family decided they were religious conservatives, very conservative religious sect, and they decided that the secular world no longer suited them, and Dad moved the family of 3 kids, I believe it was, or 4, and Mother and Dad up to the taiga in Siberia, 168 miles from the closest person. Back in the woods, they were totally self-sufficient, and they went back there in the 1930s to the point where they were so removed from society they didn't know World War II happened. Bill, now you can pick up the story and talk a little bit about what happened to this family.
Well, what happened to them is in the 70s, they were doing some overflying for oil line locations, and somebody noticed that there was some fertile ground where somebody had plowed. And so they investigated and discovered this family. And then later, much later, not much later, but they took an exploratory group in there to meet with them to see where they were. I think just out of curiosity, really.
Yeah.
They just wondered what was going on. They also wanted to know who was there, because the greatest enemy is not the animals, it's people in those areas. So they wanted to make sure they were friendly. And they got to know the family and discovered this an unbelievable story, because in addition to just escaping to the middle of nowhere, they took really nothing with them, or very little.
Right.
Very few tools. They literally lived off the land. They took a few seeds.
By the time that the oil people got there, they were really in trouble. Their plates had holes in them. They had worn everything out. Their clothing was worn out. They were trying to grow their own fibers so that they could weave their own clothing. But Bill and I were talking about, there was one incident where they'd had some bad go with the crops, and they were down to 1 rye seed.
Right. June of one of the years, they had a late frost, and it took out all their crops, so they had no food whatsoever. So they were eating like their shoes.
And Mother starved herself to death to save the kids.
Right.
I mean, this is really one of these, I mean, I ran across that story, and we've both been sharing this story with other people, and it's very dramatic. Obviously, Mother starving herself, but the saddest part about it, perhaps, is that the people who came and met with them occasionally tried to take them to the city, see if they wanted to relocate, come back to society. Instead, what they ended up doing was introducing our microbes into their environment, and 3 of the young people died within 2 weeks of each other. So now we have Agafia, the sole remaining daughter, and what happened is that the Vice video crew, the people that do some of those dramatic video, they have a show on HBO where they show news stories that they do, they sent a crew in, and they brought Agafia, the big thing on her bucket wish list was that she wanted a goat. So they brought her a goat, so she was a happy person to get her goat, but I watched this half-hour film of her, and she's happy there. She did not want to go to the city. She's not going to leave there. She's 70 years old. She was born the same year I was, and I thought how different our lives were. Mm-hmm. And she reads her Bible. It's a 400-year-old Bible. Mm-hmm. And she's in this shack. It's really a shack.
It's a terrible shack. They weren't real handy with tools. When they did have them, you could tell. I mean, when you think about what do you build an absolute oblivion. I mean, Siberia isn't even friendly to animals, hardly.
No.
So they survived all that time. I think she survived, what, more than 30 years now?
Basically alone.
By herself, right. So she does everything herself.
Now, one of the men from the oil company decided, how long ago?
That's where it got weird.
This is where it gets weird. About a dozen years ago, he decided that hermit thing looks good. And he built a shack a mile away from her. And apparently drives her nuts because she feels that she has to take care of him. That he's incompetent, and that, she feels bad about the fact that he needs all this help.
She needs an agent, and she could write a book. I mean, can you imagine Agafia's Guide to Wilderness Survival? I mean, it's unimaginable. We were talking earlier, it reminds me of some of the stories from the 1700s in, like, the Upper Peninsula where people would get ice locked on an island, through the same types of things.
I remember reading some diary accounts of women in particular who'd lived in some of the sod farms out in Kansas in the 1800s. They were so isolated, so far removed from the rest of society, and loneliness was such a huge problem. What shocked me about her was I mean, I don't think the word depression ever came into her vocabulary. And the only time she's ever been sick is when she's been to the city, and that's only been 3 or 4 times. The rest of the time she seems hardy, she seems to be content. We think of humans as social animals, and I was surprised at how well she did on her own.
Oh, absolutely. And you got to, it's like 30 below zero there most of the winter.
Yes.
Kind of like it is here now. So, and we can hardly manage it.
I felt it was a training film, Bill. I think I'm going to have to learn how to do this.
I kind of felt guilty because I didn't have power last year for 7 days.
Yes.
I was like, okay.
Yeah, but compared to that, I mean,
one of her brothers used to go out hunting for days with no shoes.
Yes.
In the snow.
How did they get that hardy?
I don't know.
I mean, I look out at the deer and I see them getting fairly desperate. And they don't wear any shoes. But they seem to be getting desperate. They're getting closer and closer. They'll eat anything they can get their hands on now. They're getting bolder and bolder in terms of coming up to houses and so forth. And
light has a lot to do with that, too.
Oh, you think that's what
it does. It's a combination of both.
What's the effect of the light?
They're getting ready to breed.
Oh, I see.
So those things they work in tandem almost.
Wow.
Plus they're hungry. They are hungry.
They are hungry.
Because they were at a sycamore tree in my front yard, which no one would eat.
Yeah, I don't think that's...
Not even...
That's not prime food on their diet.
No.
No. Mm-hmm. But there's something haunting about that. And so if you want to find the links to that, I think what I should do is post those on Lansing Online News tomorrow. We've been talking about them, and I think anybody who's seen them has been moved by that video in particular.
You know what else? It's 2 different types of storytelling. Both
it is.
Very, very well done. I like them in tandem, but we were talking about which you should do first. The story. You and I both read the story.
Right.
And I think we haven't talked to anybody that's watched the video first. Because you get different impressions. I think your mind works tricks on you when you do that.
Well, that's why I wanted to show it to my students, because we're trying to figure out in a digital world how best to tell the story. And I ran across this story because I was trying to recapture what life would have been like for people in England, Mary Houghton in particular, this woman that lived in the 1700s in Suffolk, England. And I was trying to understand, because a book called The World We Lost said one of the things that's hard for modern people to understand is how few people you saw in your life back in that era. That there were no stadiums with 80,000 people watching football on the weekends. There was no internet to reach people. If you saw 60 people at a wedding, that was a huge crowd. That most of your life was spent with your family in your home. You didn't go out to work. You worked within the home. So it was a very different kind of existence, and Agafia sort of gave me an insight into what life like that might have been.
I'm wondering if any of them will write a book about her or about the family. It deserves it.
I think Bill and I came up with at least 10 questions we want answered.
Yeah.
We want to know about the one-legged guy down the hill.
Yeah.
We have a lot of questions about what that's all about, but it was just an absolutely compelling and fascinating story. Bill's got a book that he wants to talk about. It's called Lost Detroit, and there will be a talk this Saturday at 2 at Capital Area
District Library. The photographer will be coming in, and he'll discuss his photography and his life, and he's got a short life. He's only 25.
Wow.
He started shooting Detroit abandoned buildings when he was 14. And a lot of these photos go back to when he was 14.
Now, is he an urban explorer? Does he go
He does that, yes, extensively. He's only been robbed once, he said.
Wow.
Which is actually remarkable. Because if you've ever been in any of these buildings, it's pretty scary.
It is.
Central Station, a lot of people know that one because it's sort of the iconic building of Detroit that's been abandoned. And it's, I've been in that, it's pretty scary.
My husband played the closing night at the train station in Detroit, and it was really dramatic because we went upstairs and sort of spelunked around the various upper floors, and it was very spooky. Lots of abandoned, decaying things up there, and it was strange because when you do play music in that facility, it echoed through the marble halls. I mean, it was really not a good place to listen to a concert, but it was a very strange.
Gigantic.
It is, just huge.
You know, and that was considered Michigan's Ellis Island, really.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, anybody that was coming here back in the 20s, 30s, 40s probably came through there. And the whole black migration, the great migration from the south, most of them ended up coming through that railroad station.
Now, in its heyday, it had to be beautiful.
It was. I remember, I went there in its heyday. I was through there on a train. But it lasted about 40, 50 years, and what did it in was cheap plane fare and automobile. People really didn't take trains anymore. You know, it's probably the most number used it was during World War II, with soldiers coming in and out.
Was it also just the general decline in Detroit that took a hit? Or was this
No, I think this was before that. I mean, really, I wouldn't say the decline of Detroit added to it, really. Now, the other buildings, of course, that are focused in this book, there's 12 buildings that he looks at in here. What's amazing is some of them had a second life as rock palaces, like the Grandee, the East Town, Michigan, where every rock and roller wanted to play in the world, to play in these places. But since then, a number of them have been torn down. Some have been saved. I just read today that they're putting windows in Michigan Central Station.
Really?
And I kind of commented, I don't think that's the only thing it needs.
Yeah.
Every window is broken in that place. There must be 10,000 windows.
Broken windows theory worked. Yeah, every single one gets, you know, the idea that if you break one, they'll all get broken.
It did there.
Yeah, it sure did.
And you had to go out of your way to do it, because it's pretty much fenced off and it's massive.
There's an online video that's very strange that is set in the old train station, I believe, where it shows the various bands playing on a screen in there. It was sort of mock-up done with CGI. I've seen some of that. But you said this isn't quite ruin porn. This is different.
No, the reason I don't think it's ruin porn, even though if these images stood on their own, they'd be ruin porn.
Okay.
What makes them not ruin porn is they also tell the story behind the buildings.
I see.
How it was built, who built it, the architect, what it was used for, its various reincarnations and things like that.
Wow.
So it makes it a better story than just the photographs themselves. And I do happen to like ruin porn.
Me too.
I have to admit that.
I have a taste for it.
Yes, it's
I mean, I'm sorry that it had to happen so that it exists, but if it's going to be there, I want to be one of the people that gets to see the photos.
Yes, and you can see them 2 o'clock, Capillary District Library, downtown on Saturday. He'll be showing, you know, doing a slide show kind of his photographs. He'll also be selling his photographs.
And his name again is?
Scott Dorr.
Scott Dorr, okay.